When we are embarking on the API design process, there are two main questions we really want to keep in mind. First, what is the goal of this API? And next, who is the API actually for? These two high-level questions really helped us drive the API design process. But when we're thinking about the goal of the API, this drives us to make decisions about languages, about protocols, about platforms, and about data formats. Whereas when we're thinking about the customer, this leads us to a different set of non-technical questions. Right? So this leads us to think more about versioning and about licensing and authentication. These are all really important concerns when we're designing our APIs, and we want to keep them in mind. So when we think about it, we want to really be focusing on what is the goal and who is the customer so that we can answer these questions effectively. Now again, there are a lot of different ways that we can actually design an API. But let's step through a prototypical 4-step process. So the first thing we want to do is we want to start with a short 1-page or half-page specification. And like we said just previously, right, this specification really captures what the goal of the API is and who it's for, along with those other answers about how it should be versioned, what languages it should use, what platforms, etc. Next, what we want to do is we want to solicit feedback. And again, this should sound really similar to our prior discussions about process and coming up with specifications in the first place. But we need to go and talk to people and really make sure that our APIs fulfill the needs that we actually have without incurring some long-term future problem in terms of technical debt, support, or other directions our organization might go in. Next, what we want to do is we want to create concrete prototypes. And this is often really important in the API space because we're designing these really short names, right? APIs are really just one method at a time when we think about it, right? Or a type or two at a time. So we want to create a prototype system that uses our API to accomplish some specific tasks. And what this will do is it'll help us to understand how users will use our API. So in general, we don't want to create one API. We don't want to create 2 APIs. We want to do it 3. We want to do it at least 3 times. We create 3 different clients that use an API. And by taking a look at 3 different usages of our API, we can get a sense of what forms of boilerplate that will be within the system, within the client code that maybe we can address, what kinds of errors clients might also use when they're using our APIs, and we can try to address these problems by improving the API itself. And finally, once we're happy with our API, we want to build documentation. Right, and this documentation should obviously clarify what the API is and what it does, but it's also extremely helpful if the error states for the API are clearly documented and if examples of usage are given. Right, so if we look at really strong examples of API documentation online, you'll find clear examples of how the API is used to accomplish specific tasks. Because when we think about our APIs and how people use them, they don't use them in the same way we produce them, right? We produce an API one at a time, right? But as a user, you're using that API to accomplish a task. So taking a task-centric view when we're building our documentation will make it a lot easier for people to use. Right, so this really is an iterative process, just to reinforce that, right? We want to start with our spec, solicit the feedback, and prototype, and we might need to go back to the beginning. Or we might realize that our prototypes are no good and we're going to throw that away altogether. Right, so this is an iterative process so that we can refine our APIs before they're released. Because once we release that API, it really is forever, and we're going to be stuck supporting it into the indefinite future.